Previously, on Pseudo Says by Pen Name Protection, Pseudo uncovers an old dictionary and is transported back in time to an age of ignorance and confusion and is soon distracted by an evil wind chill rabbit from the Antarctic until she loses interest. Armed only with her ability to think for herself, she sets off on a quest to understand what an atom is and where atoms originated when she discovers that the Knot Milk has hidden the information in another legendary book. Can Pseudo navigate the labyrinth of deception to find Atom, or will she trip into a rabbit hole and get distracted? Let's find out, as Where's Atom? A search for the origin of the atom continues.
I sat for a moment, somewhat baffled at the fact that a seemingly familiar word such as atom was not in a dictionary from the late 20th century. Granted, it wasn't a scientific dictionary, but that didn't seem like it should be an excuse to exclude the basic building blocks of life from its pages. So, I figured I was on to something. In desperation to avoid the computer just a little longer, I went back to my bookshelf to search for other potential resource treasures I had forgotten about. To my surprise, I uncovered yet another dictionary hidden behind a candle I've used as decor for over 30 years. I'm not sure when or where I obtained this book, as it's dated even decades older than I, and, despite being the perfect size for travel, I don't recall carrying this around back in the day. Regardless, it did have an entry for atom. Small particle. While this didn't help clarify what an atom is, it did prompt my memory of the initial issue I had with this topic, explaining why I was still confused all these years later. And much of my problem stemmed from words like particle. I let out a sigh as I sat in front of my laptop and opened up my web browser. I hit up a couple of online dictionaries first in an attempt to introduce myself to the actor playing the main character of this story. And, as I quasi-expected, the entries of every source I checked did not match with one another, with each offering slightly different vocabulary and some, not surprisingly, using contradicting language in the definition. Calling all scientists, if someone could explain how the smallest component is composed of smaller components, I sure would appreciate it. With a flimsy, sweaty handshake established, my next play was to look up the etymology of atom. And the moment the page opened, the first word I saw was hypothetical. Well, atom, if that even is your real name. I think I have an idea about how this will end. However, the only way to scratch this itch is to confirm my suspicions, which, at this moment, are as follows. Atoms are 1. A gravity-esque misdirect. B. A complete fabrication. Or trace, a genuine, intricate scientific breakthrough of which I have the slightest understanding. Although, should that be the case, then I would still suspect it to be taught and relayed with a misdirect. After noting any hints offered, yet not before being reminded I am to harbor a subconscious fear of this word, and with a theory in place, I set out to course the convoluted labyrinth known as the SERPs. I ventured to inquire with one of the two AI programs I bother to attempt to use as a tool to my advantage, Perplexity AI. To which I must say, I'm not too excited to admit I enjoy and, dare I say, appreciate this machine learning software stuff. Don't get me wrong, most days, I'm on Team John Connor. And I say please and thank you to Alexa. You know, just in case. Though, to its credit, Perplexity AI has provided me with great starting points for any rabbit hole research endeavors I decide to embark upon. And this hunt was no exception. It also gave me another big clue, notably, modern atomic theory is not based on the old concept of atoms being indivisible particles, which came from Wikipedia, so it's likely a solid play on a narrative push. Moreover, such a source often contains too many misdirects, is too vague, or, as in this case, is overwhelming with puzzling, non-linear details to be of any help. Other points came from etymology.com, which I had just seen, and indeed, these collaborated with what I saw there well enough for this point in the pursuit. So, that left me with just one place to explore. And as my luck would have it, it was from NPR. Apparently, they had done a segment on Talk of the Nation back in 2010 titled Science Diction, The Origin of the Word Atom. I mean, come on, this is calling my name. I clicked the link and was brought to the transcript, which I began to read, only to soon discover that the presentation was pure not nonsense narrative. So, I decided to turn on the audio and read along with the script while the parrots put on a little show.
The alphabet has only 26 letters. With these 26 magic symbols, however, millions of words are written every day.
And that can only mean it's time for this month's episode of Science Diction, where we talk about the history of scientific words with my guest, Howard Markel. Dr. Markel is professor of the history of medicine at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and director of the Center for the History of Medicine there. Welcome back.
Hello, Ira.
Hey, what's our word this month?
The word is atom.
A-T-O-M.
A-T-O-M, not the guy Adam, the concept
Or
Adam.
in New York, we'd spell it A-D-E-M. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, who first coined the word atom in the English language?
Well, in the English, before the English language, it's actually a Greek term. Now, there are some people who think that Indian Jainism clerics may have come up with the idea of indivisible units comprising matter. And Sir Isaac Newton thought it was a Phoenician named Moses the Phoenician from the 13th century BC, who we also linked to the real Moses, or the Moses of Charlton Heston fame. But when it comes to the word atom, we have to go to ancient Greece of 400 BC, and there was a brilliant philosopher named Democritus, and he proposed the Greek word atomos, which means uncuttable. And so, as he explained, all matter was eventually reducible into discrete small particles, or atomos.
Mm-hmm. And Thomas Norton, he wrote a book called Ordinal of Alchemy in 1477.
Well, that's right. I mean, that whole difference, by the way, between Democritus and then Thomas Norton, a couple thousand years, is because the great experts of the day, the original grows of academe, were Plato and Aristotle, and they had a different theory. They thought that matter was divisible into air, fire, earth, and water. So they didn't like his theory, and that was worse than not getting tenure back then. So it didn't come up until 1477, when a brilliant alchemist and poet named Thomas Norton, he was also a courtier for King Edward IV of England, came up with the word atoms in his poem, The Ordinal of Alchemy.
When did atom first enter the vernacular? Going from the Greek to English, things like that?
Well, it begins to catch on, the late 17th to 19th century, the golden age of chemistry, and there were all these great natural philosophers, Boyle, Lavoisier, Priestley, and all obsessing about composition and the nature of matter. And so that brought them back to reconsider the atom. And it was in 1803 when John Dalton published his atomic theory on indivisible elements and the periodic chart of the table of elements, which we all carried around and memorized in high school days. And that kept scientists busy for decades. But it was really the 1890s when scientists began looking at radioactive elements, Henri Becquerel and the Curies, and they started looking at, I love this, subatomic particles. First we say the atom is invisible, but then we know there's protons, neutrons, and electrons, and so on. And then things kept going and going. Of course, most notoriously with the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we entered the atomic age, which is not only a scientific term, but it's also a whole era of popular culture, whether it's movies or science fiction or novels.
We kept dicing the atom. As you say, we went to sub and then sub-atomic. Do we need a new term?
Well, we do, and I was thinking, that's still another episode of Science Fiction when you go from protons, electrons, neutrons to quarks, and it's just so funny. It's sort of like jumbo shrimp, or as Groucho Marx said, military intelligence. So the idea of subatomic particles is somewhat funny.
Yeah. Why did Plato and Aristotle have such an issue with poor Democritus' idea about atoms being the basic units of matter? What was so bad about
it ran counter to their theory.
Yeah.
They said they were really these earth, wind, fire, and water types of guys, and so they thought Democritus was a little bit too junior. Plato wanted to burn all of his books. He thought his work was so shoddy. But there's a real humor to that. We're talking about it now, several thousand years later. We choose to remember Democritus, even though his idea of the atom is very different from modern concepts. But his ideas were missed by the leading lights of his day, Aristotle and Plato.
How difficult would it be to coin a new phrase for subatomic? I mean, could we get one started? Do you have any suggestions?
For the whole genre?
Yeah, I mean, you're constantly saying subatomic. Why can't we just put something indifferent?
Well, maybe if we kept to something Greek or Latin, it could be atomos obscura. But they're all rather obscure, aren't they? I think subatomic right now is really the best way. We just bite our tongue as we say it.
Or we have something on physics, particle physics. That's even how do we capture these little subatomic particles? Antimatter.
Antimatter.
We have antimatter.
Yeah.
We have anti. Where does anti's been around a while too? I'm sure.
Antimatter.
Is anti a Greek word?
You're catching me on the fly here. I suspect it is, and of course we have the term the Antichrist. If you look at older literature, the idea of the opposite of something that you want to look at.
Well, I'll take you off the hook. I'll let you do your homework.
Well, they really know how to work a crowd, don't they? I don't know about you, but that type of stuff is always a nice reminder that I'm happy to be out of the matrix. Admittedly, when I was living life as a perpetual potential agent Smith, informational entertainment like this was totally my jam. Not NPR specifically, but I watched more than my fair share of PBS and whatnot. What can I say? I was kind of a nerd. And I suppose I still am. I mean, why else would I be spending my days trying to pursue my dreams of obtaining wisdom via worldly knowledge and sharing my findings using my creative talents now that I'm actually awake to live my dreams to the point I'm making friggin' YouTube videos because books are out of style as a way to hopefully eventually maybe stay financially afloat instead of trying to convince people to hire me to ghostwrite content for them until AI can.
And I'll be damned if I'm going back to working a slave position, so please stop asking me if I'm looking for a real job or just working on my website when I finally love what I'm doing for the first time in my life.
Whoa. I'm sorry. I must have triggered myself there. Back to the hunt. Well, the narrative push radio presentation provided me with many possibilities regarding the next turn I should take through this maze. And when one is traversing rabbit holes, every little decision will alter the course of your path and potentially lead you astray. Should I explore this ridiculous time gap? Should I read up on the curiously named Democritus? Or should I run to the alchemy book that piqued my curiosity? Yet, when reviewing my notes, I realize while I potentially uncovered the narrative's origin of the idea of atoms, I'm still a bit shaky in my understanding of modern science's explanation of what atoms are. So, I figured it best to first peek my head into the popular culture theater to see what was happening there. I went to my everyday search engine this time and typed, "What is an atom?" and began scrolling through the results, scanning the answer snippets as they went by. And, as it were, I soon picked up on a theme. Atoms cannot be seen. Atoms are mostly empty space. Atoms are small beyond our imaginations. Atoms are invisible to the naked eye. Wait, what was that word? Oh no, not this again.
We are fighting an invisible enemy in terms of our psychology right now, right?
Invisible enemy.
An invisible enemy.
An invisible enemy.